My name is Amelia Grayson, and I have a story to tell. A story about betrayal, about the slow poison of family secrets, and about the exquisite, slow-burn pleasure of revenge. It all began, as these stories often do, with a child's innocent question. "Mommy, why is Daddy leaving?" 6-year-old Owen stood in the doorway of our Connecticut living room, his eyes wide and confused. Sunlight streamed through the French windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. A stark contrast to the heavy silence that had settled over the house. William's suitcase stood by the front door, packed and ready. A physical manifestation of the chasm that had opened up between us. "He's just going on a short trip," I stammered, my voice catching in my throat. "A trip. That's what we'd agreed on. A trip to Catherine's. My sister's." Owen tilted his head, his brow furrowed. But he packed all his blue shirts. He only packs those for long trips. He knew his father's habits better than I did, or maybe I had just stopped paying attention. Had I been so blind? So caught up in maintaining the facade of the perfect life that my parents had orchestrated for me that I hadn't seen the cracks spreading like spiderwebs across my marriage? "Daddy has a lot of meetings," I said, forcing a smile. My mother, Victoria, materialized beside me, her hand resting on my shoulder, her grip surprisingly tight. "Owen, darling," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Daddy has important business to attend to. He'll be back soon." But why can't Mommy go? The question hung in the air, thick with unspoken truths. Victoria's grip on my shoulder tightened, a silent warning. "Mommy has to stay here and look after you," I said quickly, turning Owen towards the playroom. "Why don't you go and finish building that magnificent Lego castle?" He trudged off, his small shoulders slumped, the image of his retreating back a mirror of my own defeated posture. As soon as he was out of earshot, Victoria turned to me, her face a mask of disapproval. "You mustn't let him see you like this, Amelia. It's unbecoming." "Unbecoming," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "He's 6 years old, Mother. His father is leaving him." "William is simply attending to business matters," she corrected, her voice clipped. "And it's your responsibility to ensure that this unpleasantness doesn't disrupt Owen's routine." Routine. I laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Our entire life is a routine, Mother, a carefully choreographed performance for your benefit." And now the lead actor has walked off stage. My father, Henry, entered the room, his face creased with worry, but not for me. "Victoria, have you spoken to Catherine? We need to ensure this doesn't leak." Leak. The word echoed the hollowness I felt inside. They weren't worried about their daughter's broken marriage, about their grandson's confusion. They were worried about appearances, about maintaining the flawless image of the Grayson family, an image that was about to shatter into a million pieces. "She's on her way here," Victoria said, her voice tight. "We need to present a united front. For the family." I looked at them, my parents, the architects of my gilded cage. My perfect sister, Catherine, the woman my husband was leaving me for. And Owen, my son, caught in the crossfire of their carefully constructed lies. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The grief, the confusion, the hurt, coalesced into a hard, cold ball of resolve. I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let them control my life, or Owen's any longer. The game, I realized, was about to change, and I was ready to play. The days that followed William's departure were a blur of strained smiles and hushed phone calls. My parents orchestrated a carefully crafted narrative. William was working on a crucial project overseas. A project so demanding it required his undivided attention. A project that, coincidentally, aligned perfectly with Catherine's business trip to London. I played along, a puppet dancing to their tune. I soothed Owen's anxieties, fielding his endless questions about his father's return with practiced lies. I attended social functions, plastering a smile on my face and fielding sympathetic glances from acquaintances who knew, or suspected, the truth. The whispers followed me like shadows, each one a tiny pinprick of humiliation. But behind the facade, a quiet rage was building. I wasn't just mourning the loss of my marriage. I was mourning the loss of the life I thought I had. The life my parents had built for me. A life that, I now realized, was built on a foundation of lies and carefully constructed illusions. The confirmation, when it came, wasn't a dramatic confrontation, but a series of small, almost imperceptible clues. A misplaced earring found tucked in the pocket of William's blazer, a hastily deleted text message glimpsed on his iPad, a shared glance between Catherine and my mother, a glance that spoke volumes. It was a slow, agonizing unraveling, each piece of the puzzle falling into place to reveal the ugly truth. I confronted my mother, not with accusations, but with a quiet, steady gaze. "He's with Catherine, isn't he?" She didn't deny it. Instead, she sighed, a dramatic exhalation of breath, and said, "Amelia, you have to understand. These things happen. Marriages fail." "Fail," I repeated, my voice rising. "He left me for my sister." "Catherine is vibrant," my mother offered, as if that explained everything. "She understands William's ambitions. You've always been more domesticated." The word stung, a slap in the face disguised as concern. Domesticated. A gilded cage by any other name. My father, ever the peacemaker, chimed in. "Amelia, your mother is right. This is unfortunate, but we need to move forward. We need to think about what's best for the family." "What's best for the family?" I laughed, the sound hollow and devoid of humor. "What about what's best for me? For Owen? You'll be taken care of, Amelia," my father said, his tone dismissive. "Financially, you have nothing to worry about. Taken care of. Another euphemism for control. They would keep me financially dependent, a prisoner in their gilded cage, while William and Catherine paraded their happiness in front of the world." The thought was unbearable. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the length of my bedroom, the anger simmering inside me, a pot about to boil over. I looked at pictures of Owen, his innocent smile a stark contrast to the turmoil I felt. He deserved better than this. I deserved better than this. The first seeds of revenge were sown that night. Small, almost insignificant acts of defiance. I stopped answering my mother's calls, feigning a busy schedule. I enrolled Owen in a soccer league across town, far from the watchful eyes of my parents and their carefully curated social circle. I started wearing brighter colors, a subtle rebellion against the muted tones my mother had always insisted I wear. I even started subtly manipulating situations, planting seeds of doubt in William and Catherine's minds. A casual mention of William's long working hours to Catherine, a seemingly innocent comment about Catherine's frequent trips to London to William. Nothing overt, just enough to create a sliver of unease, a crack in the foundation of their perfect little affair. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A small flicker of control in a life that had felt increasingly out of my hands. The game had begun, and I was determined to play it my way. The Graysons were known for their impeccable image. I would slowly, meticulously, dismantle it piece by piece. They had taken everything from me. Now it was my turn to take something back. The weight of my parents' disapproval, the constant whispers, the suffocating feeling of being trapped, it was all becoming too much. I needed an escape, a confidant, someone outside the gilded cage of my family. I needed Isabel. Isabel had been my best friend since college, a constant through the ever-shifting tides of my life. She was the antithesis of everything my family represented, outspoken, independent, and unapologetically herself. She and her husband, Daniel, a sharp lawyer with a dry wit, lived in a cozy brownstone in Brooklyn, a world away from the manicured lawns and sprawling estates of Connecticut. They blamed me. I blurted out the moment Isabel opened the door, the words tumbling out in a rush. They said I wasn't vibrant enough for William, that Catherine understood his ambitions. Isabel pulled me into a hug, the warmth of her embrace a welcome contrast to the icy chill that had settled over my life. "Those people are insane," she said, her voice firm. "You are one of the most intelligent, capable women I know. They're just threatened by anyone who doesn't fit into their little step-forward wives' fantasy." Daniel, overhearing the conversation, emerged from the kitchen, a glass of wine in hand. "So, the Grayson family drama has finally reached Act 2, he said, a wry smile playing on his lips. "What's the current state of play?" Over a bottle of wine and a plate of takeout, I spilled everything. The affair, my parents' reaction, my simmering resentment, the small acts of rebellion I'd already started. "You want revenge," Daniel said, stating it as a fact, not a question. I nodded, meeting his gaze. "They took everything from me. My husband, my home, my sense of self. I want them to feel the pain I feel." Daniel took a sip of his wine, his expression thoughtful. "Going down the legal route would be messy, protracted, and ultimately unsatisfying. You'd spend a fortune and likely end up with nothing but a hefty legal bill and more emotional baggage." "So, what do you suggest?" I asked, my voice tinged with desperation. "Play the long game," he advised. "Subtlety is your greatest weapon. Expose their hypocrisy, dismantle their carefully constructed image, brick by brick. Let them self-destruct." Isabel nodded in agreement. "They're so obsessed with appearances. A few well-placed cracks in their facade will do more damage than any courtroom showdown." Their words resonated with me. A messy legal battle wasn't what I wanted. I wanted something more elegant, more calculated. I wanted them to understand the consequences of their actions, to feel the slow burn of their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. As I left their apartment that night, a sense of purpose had replaced the despair I'd been carrying. I had a plan, a strategy. I wouldn't be a victim. I would be a player. The next day, I made a call I'd been putting off for years. A call to my brother James. He was the black sheep of the family, the one who had escaped their suffocating grasp years ago. He had built a successful business on his own terms, far from the stifling expectations of our parents. "James, it's Amelia," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Amelia?"
He sounded surprised, wary.
"Is everything all right?" "No," I admitted. "Everything is far from all right. I need your help." He listened patiently as I recounted the events of the past few weeks. There was a long silence after I finished speaking, a silence filled with unspoken understanding. "Come out to California," he finally said, his voice warm and reassuring. "Stay with me for a while. Clear your head. We'll figure this out together." James's offer was a lifeline,
An escape.
an alliance. He had always been the outsider, the one who saw through our parents' manipulations. He would be a valuable ally in the game I was about to play. I booked a flight the next day, leaving a brief note for my parents, informing them I was taking Owen on an extended vacation. I didn't ask for their permission. I didn't offer an explanation. I was done asking for their approval. I was taking control of my life, and Owen's finally. The game was on, and I was ready to play to win. California was a revelation. The sunshine, the open space, the sheer distance from my parents' suffocating influence. It was like breathing for the first time in years. James's house, perched on a hill overlooking the Pacific, was a sanctuary, a world away from the gilded cage of my Connecticut life. He didn't pry, didn't offer unsolicited advice. He simply listened, offering a steady presence, a quiet strength that I hadn't realized how much I craved. Owen thrived in the California sun, spending his days exploring the beach, building sandcastles, and making new friends. He seemed lighter, freer, unburdened by the unspoken tensions that had permeated our lives back east. "You're different," James observed one evening, as we watched the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. "You seem lighter." I smiled, a genuine smile, not the strained, practiced smile I'd worn for so long. "I am different," I admitted. "I'm finally starting to feel like myself again." James nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Good," he said softly. "That's what they took from you, you know. They never wanted you to be yourself. They wanted you to be a reflection of their own ambitions, their own carefully constructed image." His words struck a chord. I had spent my entire life trying to live up to their expectations, contorting myself into the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect mother. I had lost myself in the process. "I'm taking it back," I said, my voice firm. "I'm taking back my life." James squeezed my shoulder. "That's my girl," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. Over the next few weeks, with James's support, I began to reclaim my life, piece by piece. I started working remotely for a small design firm, rediscovering the passion for interior design that I had buried beneath years of societal expectations. I enrolled Owen in a progressive school that encouraged creativity and independence. And I started subtly chipping away at Catherine's carefully constructed persona. Social media became my weapon of choice. I'd post seemingly innocuous pictures of Owen and me enjoying our new life, pictures that subtly highlighted Catherine's absence. I'd leave comments on her meticulously curated Instagram posts, comments that hinted at the cracks in her perfect facade. "William's working late again?" I'd write, or "London must be exhausting. You look tired." Nothing overt, just enough to sow a seed of doubt, to create a subtle undercurrent of tension. Back in Connecticut, the whispers intensified. My parents' carefully crafted narrative about William's extended business trip was starting to unravel. The cracks in Catherine's perfect image were becoming more visible. Their carefully constructed world was starting to crumble, just as I had planned. William's calls became more frequent, his voice laced with a mixture of guilt and frustration. He complained about Catherine's constant social engagements, about her demanding nature, about the pressure of maintaining their public image. I listened patiently, offering non-committal responses, feeding his insecurities with carefully chosen words. "It sounds like you're both under a lot of stress," I'd say, or "It must be difficult to maintain such a demanding lifestyle." I wasn't interested in reconciliation. I was interested in watching him squirm. One afternoon, James walked into my home office, a strange expression on his face. "I just got off the phone with Dad," he said, his voice low. "He's not well." My heart sank. Despite everything, I still loved my father. The news of his illness hit me harder than I expected. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. James hesitated. "He wants to see you," he said finally. "He wants to see you and Owen." I looked at a picture of Owen, his bright smile radiating from the frame. I knew I had to go back. Not for my parents, not for Catherine, but for Owen. He deserved to know his grandfather, flaws and all. And maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for some kind of closure, some kind of understanding. I booked our flights back to Connecticut, a knot of apprehension twisting in my stomach. I was returning to the lion's den, but this time, I wasn't a caged animal. I was a predator, returning to survey the damage I had wrought. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just getting started. Returning to Connecticut felt like stepping back in time. The familiar scent of my mother's lilies, the oppressive silence of the Grayson Manor, the weight of unspoken expectations, it all came rushing back, threatening to suffocate me. But this time I was armed. I had a newfound sense of self, a quiet strength that I hadn't possessed before. My father was weaker than I remembered, his face pale and drawn, his eyes clouded with a mixture of pain and regret. He held Owen close, whispering stories of his childhood, stories I had never heard before. There was a fragility to him, a vulnerability that I hadn't seen before. It chipped away at the resentment I had harbored for so long. My mother, however, was unchanged. She greeted me with a strained embrace, her eyes flitting around the room, assessing the damage. "You look tan," she observed, her tone laced with disapproval. "And Owen's hair is unruly." I simply smiled, a serene smile that infuriated her more than any outburst ever could. "We've been enjoying the California sunshine," I said, my voice calm and steady. "It suits us." Catherine was conspicuously absent. My mother claimed she was busy with work, a thinly veiled excuse that fooled no one. I didn't press the issue. I knew where she was. With William, trying to salvage the crumbling remains of their ill-gotten relationship. Over the next few days, I spent my time with my father listening to his stories, holding his hand, trying to bridge the gap that had always existed between us. He seemed genuinely remorseful, not just for his failing health, but for the way he had treated me, for the life he had allowed my mother to orchestrate for me. One evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows across his hospital room, He beckoned me closer. "There's something I need to tell you, Amelia," he whispered, his voice weak. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." He confessed a shocking family secret, a secret that had been buried for years. A trust fund, established by my grandfather, meant solely for James. A trust fund that my mother had systematically depleted, funneling the money towards Catherine's education, her lavish wedding, her business ventures. A trust fund that rightfully belonged to my brother, the black sheep, the one they had cast aside. She stole from him? I asked, my voice barely audible. My father nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "She convinced me it was for the good of the family," he whispered. "That he wouldn't appreciate it. That Catherine deserved it." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the betrayal, the years of deceit, the blatant favoritism that had poisoned our family dynamic. It was the missing piece of the puzzle, the final confirmation of everything I had suspected. My father's confession was more than just a family secret. It was a weapon that could dismantle the carefully constructed world my parents had built, a world built on lies and injustice. It was the catalyst I had been waiting for. I held my father's hand as he drifted off to sleep, his breathing shallow and labored. The anger I had felt towards him was replaced by a strange mixture of pity and resolve. He was a victim too, a victim of my mother's manipulation, a victim of his own weakness. I left the hospital that night with a newfound sense of purpose. The game had changed again. It was no longer about revenge. It was about justice. It was about exposing the truth, no matter how painful. I called James, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and grief. "He told me everything," I said, "about the trust fund, about what Mom did." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, a silence filled with unspoken pain. "I knew," James finally said, his voice flat. "I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined. It's time," I said, my voice firm. "It's time to expose them. It's time to set things right." James agreed. We would return to Connecticut together, not as the prodigal son and the disgraced daughter, but as a united front. We would reclaim what was rightfully ours, not just the money, but the truth. The game was entering its final act, and I was ready to deliver the checkmate. The fallout was swift and brutal. The carefully curated image of the Grayson family, the image my parents had spent a lifetime building, shattered into a million pieces. The whispers turned into shouts, the veiled accusations into public condemnations. My mother, stripped of her social standing, retreated into a shell of denial and bitterness. She refused to speak to me, to James, to anyone who dared to question her version of the truth. She became a pariah, ostracized by the very social circle she had so desperately sought to impress. The irony was almost poetic. She had built her life on appearances, and now, appearances had destroyed her. Catherine, exposed and humiliated, lashed out at everyone around her. Her carefully constructed persona of the perfect wife, the successful businesswoman, crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. William, caught in the crossfire, finally saw the true nature of the woman he had left me for. Their relationship, built on a foundation of lies and deceit, imploded in a spectacularly public fashion. The divorce was messy, protracted, and ultimately pointless. There was nothing left to salvage. The love, or what they had mistaken for love, had evaporated, leaving behind only bitterness and resentment. James, armed with the truth and the unwavering support of Daniel, reclaimed his rightful inheritance. It wasn't about the money, though the financial security was welcome. It was about justice, about reclaiming what had been stolen from him. He used a portion of the money to establish a foundation in our grandfather's name, a foundation dedicated to supporting young entrepreneurs. A quiet act of defiance against the values my parents had espoused. He also insisted on providing for Owen and me, ensuring our financial independence from our parents. I initially resisted, clinging to the remnants of my pride, but he wouldn't hear of it. "This isn't charity, Amelia," he said gently. "This is family. We take care of each other." His words, simple yet profound, resonated deep within me. Family. Not the toxic, dysfunctional family I had grown up with, but a new kind of family built on honesty, respect, and unconditional love. The community, once so quick to admire the Graysons' seemingly perfect life, now reveled in their downfall. The gossip columns were filled with salacious details, each article a fresh wound, a constant reminder of the public humiliation they had endured. I felt a pang of guilt, a fleeting moment of empathy for the pain they were experiencing. But the guilt was quickly replaced by a sense of liberation. The weight that had been pressing down on me for so long, the weight of their expectations, their judgments, their control was finally gone. I could breathe again. I could be myself again. The grand house in Connecticut, once a symbol of my gilded cage, was sold. The proceeds were divided between James and me, a final severance from the life I had once known. I found a small cottage near the coast, a cozy haven filled with light and laughter. It wasn't grand, it wasn't opulent, but it was ours. A place where Owen and I could build our own traditions, our own memories, free from the shadows of the past. The revenge, I realized, wasn't about destroying my family. It was about liberating myself. It was about reclaiming my narrative, about rewriting the story of my life. It was about creating a new kind of family, a family built on love, not lies. A family where Owen could grow up knowing the truth, knowing that his mother wasn't a victim, but a survivor. The game was over. I had won, but the victory wasn't about the spoils. It was about the freedom to finally be me. The silence in the aftermath was deafening. The constant hum of social obligations, the hushed whispers, the ever-present weight of my parents' expectations, it was all gone, replaced by an unsettling quiet. The house felt too big, too empty. Even Owen's laughter seemed to echo in the cavernous rooms. The community, once so eager to bask in the reflected glory of the Grayson name, now shunned us. Invitations dried up. Phone calls went unanswered. The few people who did reach out did so with a mixture of morbid curiosity and thinly veiled pity. I found myself avoiding social gatherings, preferring the quiet solitude of my garden to the whispers and stares of the social circuit. My mother retreated into a self-imposed exile, refusing to acknowledge the wreckage she had wrought. She spent her days locked in her room, surrounded by the remnants of her former life. Photo albums filled with smiling faces, trophies commemorating social victories, designer clothes hanging unworn in her closet. She became a ghost, haunting the halls of the Grayson Manor, a living testament to the destructive power of unchecked ambition and carefully constructed illusions. Catherine, stripped bare of her pretense, was a shadow of her former self. The divorce from William had been acrimonious, leaving her financially depleted and emotionally shattered. The community, once so quick to praise her beauty and grace, now saw her for what she was, a manipulative, social climbing opportunist. The whispers followed her everywhere, a constant reminder of her fall from grace. I saw her once, by chance, at the local grocery store. Her eyes, once bright and full of confidence, were dull and lifeless. She avoided my gaze, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of the pain she had inflicted. William, adrift and alone, tried to salvage his career, but the scandal had tarnished his reputation. He became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of ambition unchecked by morality. He called me a few times, his voice laced with regret, but I refused to engage. There was nothing left to say. The bridge between us had been burned, reduced to ashes by his betrayal. James, ever the pragmatist, focused on rebuilding his life and mine. He oversaw the sale of the Grayson Manor, ensuring that both he and I received our fair share of the proceeds. He encouraged me to pursue my passion for interior design, offering financial support and unwavering encouragement. He became the brother I had always longed for, the confidant I had always needed. Owen, resilient and adaptable, seemed to weather the storm better than any of us. He made new friends, excelled in school, and found solace in the simple pleasures of childhood. He asked about his father occasionally, but the questions were less frequent, less insistent. He seemed to sense, on some level, the complexities of the situation, the unspoken truths that lay beneath the surface. I bought a small cottage near the ocean, a world away from the oppressive grandeur of the Grayson Manor. It was a modest home, but it was filled with light and laughter. It was a sanctuary, a place where Owen and I could heal, where we could build a new life, free from the shadows of the past. The evenings were quiet, filled with the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore, the gentle rustling of leaves in the trees, the comforting sound of Owen's breathing as he slept soundly in his bed. I would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink, and think about the journey I had taken, the battles I had fought, the victories I had won. The revenge, I realized, hadn't been about destroying my family. It had been about saving myself. It had been about reclaiming my voice, my identity, my life. It had been about breaking free from the gilded cage and discovering the true meaning of family, of love, of forgiveness. The scars of the past would always be there, a reminder of the battles I had fought, but they no longer defined me. I was free. Life in the small coastal cottage settled into a comfortable rhythm. The days were filled with the simple joys of motherhood, the quiet satisfaction of building a business, the comforting presence of the ocean. The constant tension that had permeated my life for so long had finally dissipated, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't known I was capable of feeling. Owen blossomed in our new life. He made friends easily, his laughter echoing through the house, filling the rooms with a warmth that chased away the lingering shadows of the past. He rarely mentioned his father, and when he did, it was with a detached curiosity, not the heart-wrenching longing of a child missing a parent. He was healing, growing, adapting to our new reality with a resilience that both amazed and humbled me. My design business thrived. Freed from the constraints of my parents' expectations, I embraced my own unique style, creating spaces that were both beautiful and functional. Spaces that reflected the personalities of my clients, not the dictates of current trends. Word of mouth spread quickly, and soon I had more clients than I could handle. It wasn't about the money, though the financial independence was welcome. It was about the creative fulfillment, the satisfaction of building something on my own terms. James became a regular fixture in our lives, visiting whenever he could, bringing with him a sense of normalcy, of family. He and Owen formed a close bond, a bond forged in shared experience, in mutual respect. He was the brother I had always wished for, the protector, the confidant, the unwavering source of support. He never judged, never pressured, simply accepted me for who I was, flaws and all. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Owen and I were building a sandcastle on the beach, I saw a familiar figure walking towards us. It was my mother. She looked older, frilier, the sharp edges of her personality softened by time and circumstance. She didn't apologize, didn't offer excuses. She simply stood there, watching Owen play, a wistful expression on her face. "He looks happy," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "He is," I replied, my voice steady. We stood in silence for a long moment, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore filling the void between us. There was nothing left to say. The years of resentment, the accusations, the recriminations, had all faded away, leaving behind a quiet understanding. Can I sit?" she asked, her voice hesitant. I nodded, gesturing to a spot on the sand beside me. We sat in silence, watching Owen build his sandcastle, his small hands working diligently, his brow furrowed in concentration. In that moment, the past and the present converged, the complexities of our family history distilled into this simple, shared experience. She didn't stay long. She simply watched Owen for a while, then stood up, brushed the sand off her dress, and walked away. There were no tearful reconciliations, no dramatic pronouncements of forgiveness. Just a quiet acceptance, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken truths that lay between us. Catherine never reached out. I heard, through mutual acquaintances, that she had left Connecticut, seeking a fresh start in a new city, far from the scene of her downfall. I didn't judge her. Everyone deserves a second chance, a chance to rewrite their own story. William remained a distant figure, a ghost from a past life. I received occasional updates about his career, his new relationships, but they held no emotional weight. He was a stranger, a man I had once loved, but no longer knew. As the years passed, the sharp edges of the past softened, the memories fading into a sepia-toned haze. The anger, the hurt, the resentment gradually dissipated, replaced by a quiet acceptance, a hard-won peace. One evening, as Owen, now a teenager, and I were watching the sunset, he turned to me, his eyes filled with a wisdom beyond his years. "Do you ever miss them?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I thought for a moment, considering the question. "I miss who I thought they were," I finally said, my voice soft. "But I don't miss who they actually were." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Me neither," he said quietly. We sat in silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in a breathtaking display of color. The past was gone, but the lessons remained, etched into our hearts, shaping who we had become. We had built our own family, our own traditions, our own definition of happiness. We had reclaimed our story, and that, I realized, was the greatest revenge of all. My name is Clara Monroe, and I never thought I'd be staring at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test in the bathroom of my college dorm. But here I was, my hands shaking, my future suddenly uncertain. I took a deep breath and dialed Grant's number. My boyfriend of 2 years answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, babe, what's up?" "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Can you come over?" There was a pause.
Now?
"I'm kind of in the middle of something." "It's important, Grant. Please."
He sighed.
"All right. Give me 20 minutes." The wait felt like an eternity. I paced my small room, rehearsing what to say, how to break the news that would change both our lives forever. A knock on the door made me jump. I opened it to find Grant, his brow furrowed with concern. "Clara, what's going on? You look pale." I gestured for him to sit on the bed. "Grant, I'm pregnant." His face went blank.
What? How?
"You know how," I said, a hint of irritation creeping into my voice. "We weren't always careful." Grant stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. "This can't be happening. Are you sure?" I nodded, showing him the test. He stared at it, then at me, his eyes wide with panic. "I can't do this, Clara." Grant's voice was low, almost a whisper. "I never wanted this. You have to get rid of it." The words hit me like a punch, leaving me breathless and alone. "Get rid of it? Grant, this is our baby." He shook his head vehemently.
No, it's not.
"It's a mistake. I'm not ready to be a father. I have plans, Clara. A future. This would ruin everything." Tears welled up in my eyes. "So that's it? You're just going to abandon me? Abandon us?" Grant's face hardened. "There is no us, Clara. Not anymore. I'm sorry, but I can't do this. You're on your own." He turned and walked out, leaving me standing there, my world crumbling around me. The next few days passed in a blur. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The thought of telling my parents terrified me. They were strict, conservative, obsessed with appearances. This news would devastate them, but I couldn't hide it forever. With trembling fingers, I dialed home. "Hello." My mother's crisp voice answered. "Mom, it's Clara. I need to come home this weekend. There's something important I need to tell you, and Dad." There was a pause. "Clara, what's wrong? You sound upset." I swallowed hard. "I'd rather talk in person." "Please, Mom." She sighed.
All right.
"We'll expect you Friday evening." The drive home felt like a journey to the gallows. As I pulled into our manicured driveway, I saw my sister Vera's car already there.
Great.
An audience for my shame. I walked in to find my family gathered in the living room. My father, Calvin, sat in his armchair, his face stern. My mother, Evelyn, perched on the edge of the sofa, worry etched on her features. Vera lounged in the corner, watching me with curiosity. "Clara," my father's voice boomed. "What's this all about?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the storm to come. Mom, Dad, Vera, I'm pregnant. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, all at once, chaos erupted. Pregnant. My mother gasped. How could you be so irresponsible? My father's face turned red with anger. Who's the father? That Parker boy. Vera just stared, her expression unreadable. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. It's Grant's, but he doesn't want anything to do with it. With us. My mother buried her face in her hands. Oh, the shame. What will people say? They won't say anything, my father growled, because this isn't happening. Clara, you will take care of this. Immediately. I looked up, shocked. Take care of it? You mean? An abortion, of course, he said coldly. It's the only way to salvage this situation. I wrapped my arms protectively around my stomach.
No.
I won't do that. My father stood, towering over me. You will do as I say, or you are no longer welcome in this family. Do you understand? I looked from face to face, searching for any sign of support, of love. I found none. In that moment, I knew my life would never be the same. The silence in the living room was suffocating. My father's ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. I looked at my mother, hoping for a shred of sympathy, but her eyes were fixed on the floor. You can't be serious. I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. My father's face hardened. I've never been more serious in my life, Clara. This mistake will ruin everything we've built. Our reputation, our standing in the community. I won't allow it. Allow it? I felt a spark of anger ignite within me. This isn't your decision to make, Dad. It's my body, my baby. Your baby? My mother's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. You're barely more than a child yourself. How do you expect to raise a baby? With no job, no husband, no future? I wrapped my arms protectively around my stomach. I'll figure it out. I'm not getting rid of my child just to save face for this family. Vera, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Clara, maybe you should listen to Mom and Dad. They only want what's best for you. I turned to her, disbelief etched on my face. What's best for me? Or what's best for them? My father stood, looming over me. Enough. You will do as you're told, Clara. I've made an appointment at the clinic for tomorrow morning. This discussion is over. No, I said, my voice stronger now. I won't do it. You can't force me. His face turned an alarming shade of red. Then you are no longer welcome in this house. Pack your things and get out. Calvin, my mother gasped, but he silenced her with a look. I felt the world spinning around me. This couldn't be happening. These were my parents, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But as I looked at their faces, I saw only disappointment and disgust. Fine, I said, my voice shaking.
I'll go.
But don't expect me to come crawling back when you realize what a mistake you're making. I turned and ran up the stairs to my childhood bedroom, tears blurring my vision. I threw clothes haphazardly into a duffel bag, my mind racing. Where would I go? What would I do? A soft knock on the door made me pause. Vera stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Clara, Save it, I snapped. You made your position clear downstairs. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do. This is all so sudden. I zipped up my bag, avoiding her gaze. Yeah, well, welcome to my world. Where will you go? I shrugged, trying to appear more confident than I felt. I'll figure something out. Maybe Aunt Mabel will take me in. Vera reached into her purse and pulled out a wad of cash.
Here, take this.
It's not much, but it might help. I stared at the money, torn between pride and desperation. Finally, I took it, shoving it into my pocket. Thanks, I mumbled. She hesitated, then pulled me into a tight hug. Be careful, okay? And call me if you need anything. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Then I shouldered my bag and walked out of my childhood home, possibly for the last time. As I drove away, I could see my parents watching from the window. My mother's face was streaked with tears, but my father's remained impassive. I felt a mix of anger, fear, and overwhelming sadness. I pulled over a few blocks away, my hands shaking too badly to drive. I took out my phone and dialed Aunt Mabel's number, praying she would answer. Hello. Her warm voice filled me with hope. Aunt Mabel? It's Clara. I need help. Can I come stay with you for a while? There was a pause, and I held my breath. Then, of course, sweetheart. You come right over. We'll figure this out together. As I hung up and started the car again, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. I placed a hand on my stomach, whispering a promise to my unborn child. We're going to be all right. I'll make sure of it. The sterile walls of the clinic seemed to close in around me as I sat in the waiting room, my hands trembling in my lap. Aunt Mabel had insisted on coming with me for the consultation, her steady presence a comfort I desperately needed. Clara Monroe? A nurse called my name, her voice echoing in the quiet space. I stood on shaky legs, Aunt Mabel's hand on my back guiding me forward. The nurse led us to a small examination room where a doctor waited, her kind eyes meeting mine as we entered. Hello, Clara. I'm Dr.
Patel.
I understand you're here to discuss your options. I nodded, unable to find my voice.
Dr.
Patel's tone was gentle as she continued. Before we proceed, we need to do a thorough health assessment. Have you had any complications with this pregnancy so far? No, I managed to whisper. I don't think so. The examination that followed was a blur of questions, blood tests, and an ultrasound that made everything suddenly, terrifyingly real. As I lay on the table, staring at the grainy image on the screen, I felt a surge of emotion I couldn't quite name. Clara, Dr. Patel said, her voice serious. There's something we need to discuss. My heart raced as I sat up, clutching Aunt Mabel's hand. What is it? Is something wrong with the baby?
Dr.
Patel shook her head. No, the fetus appears healthy. However, we've detected some abnormalities in your reproductive system. An abortion at this stage could potentially compromise your ability to have children in the future. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? What do you mean? There's a higher than usual risk of complications that could affect your fertility, she explained gently. It's not a certainty, but it's a risk you need to be aware of when making your decision. I felt the room spin around me. The choice that had seemed so clear-cut to my parents suddenly became infinitely more complex. This wasn't just about now. It was about my entire future. I need a moment, I stammered, stumbling out of the room and into the hallway. Aunt Mabel followed, her face etched with concern. Clara, honey, talk to me. I leaned against the wall, tears streaming down my face. What am I supposed to do, Aunt Mabel? If I go through with this, I might never be able to have children again. But if I don't... She pulled me into a tight hug. This is your decision, Clara. Not your parents', not mine. Yours. What does your heart tell you? I closed my eyes, one hand resting on my stomach. In that moment, I felt a connection to the life growing inside me, a fierce protectiveness I couldn't ignore. I want to keep it, I whispered, the words surprising even me. I want to keep my baby. Aunt Mabel nodded, a small smile on her face. Then that's what you'll do. And we'll face whatever comes together. We returned to the examination room, where Dr. Patel waited patiently. I've made my decision, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I'm keeping the baby.
Dr.
Patel nodded, her expression neutral but kind. All right, Clara. Let's discuss prenatal care and what you can expect in the coming months. As we left the clinic, armed with pamphlets and a list of follow-up appointments, I felt a strange mix of terror and determination. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from my father. The appointment should be over. It's done. My fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before I typed my response. It's done, but not in the way you want it. I'm keeping my baby. Don't contact me again. I turned off my phone, knowing the storm that would follow. But as Aunt Mabel drove us home, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. For the first time since this all began, I was making a choice for myself, for my future, for my child. "You're very brave, Clara," Aunt Mabel said softly as we pulled into her driveway. I looked at her, tears in my eyes but a smile on my face. "I don't feel brave. I feel terrified." She squeezed my hand. "That's what bravery is, honey. Doing what's right even when you're scared out of your mind." As we walked into the house, I knew my journey was just beginning. But for the first time, I felt ready to face it head-on. The old farmhouse creaked and settled as I unpacked my meager belongings in Aunt Mabel's guest room. Each item I pulled from my bag felt like a reminder of the life I'd left behind. Clothes I'd never wear to family dinners again. Books from classes I might not finish. And buried at the bottom, a small stuffed rabbit I'd had since childhood, a gift from my mother on my 5th birthday. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. "Clara, may I come in?" Aunt Mabel's voice was gentle, as always. "Of course," I replied, hastily wiping away a stray tear. Aunt Mabel entered, her eyes taking in the half-empty bag and the clutter on the bed. She sat down beside me, placing a warm hand on my shoulder. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" I tried to smile, but it felt more like a grimace. "I'm okay, just adjusting." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "It's a lot to process, but I want you to know that you're safe here. You and your baby both." At the mention of the baby, my hand instinctively went to my still flat stomach. "Thank you, Aunt Mabel. I don't know what I'd do without you and Uncle Roy." "Family helps family," she said firmly. "Now let's get you settled in properly." Over the next few hours, Aunt Mabel helped me organize my new space. As we worked, she filled me in on the routines of the house, making sure I felt at home. Uncle Roy poked his head in occasionally, offering to help or bringing us glasses of sweet tea. As evening fell, we gathered in the cozy kitchen for dinner. The warm aroma of pot roast filled the air, reminding me of Sunday dinners at home. For a moment, homesickness washed over me so strongly I could barely breathe. "You all right there, Clara?" Uncle Roy's quiet voice broke through my reverie. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Just remembering." Aunt Mabel reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "It's okay to miss them, you know, even after everything." "I don't miss them," I said, surprised by the bitterness in my voice. "I miss who I thought they were, who I wanted them to be." Uncle Roy cleared his throat. "Your parents, they've always been set in their ways. But that doesn't make what they did right." "Have you heard from them?" I asked, almost afraid of the answer. Aunt Mabel hesitated before responding. "Your mother called earlier. I told her you were safe, but that you needed space." I nodded, grateful for her protection. "And what did she say?" She wants you to reconsider, to come home." Anger flared in my chest. Home? They kicked me out. They chose their precious reputation over their own daughter and grandchild. "I know, sweetheart," Aunt Mabel soothed. "And you don't have to do anything you don't want to. You're welcome here for as long as you need." As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, I found myself relaxing. The warmth and acceptance in this kitchen were a stark contrast to the cold judgment I'd left behind. Later that night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Vera. "Mom and Dad are furious. Are you okay?" I stared at the screen, conflicting emotions warring within me. Part of me wanted to pour out everything to my sister, but another part held back, unsure of where her loyalties truly lay. Finally, I typed out a response. "I'm safe. That's all that matters right now." Vera's reply came quickly. "I'm glad. I'm sorry about everything. If you need anything." I turned off my phone without responding, too emotionally drained to navigate the complexities of family dynamics any further. As I drifted off to sleep, one hand resting protectively on my stomach, I made a silent promise to my unborn child. "We're going to be okay. We have a real family now, one that accepts us as we are." For the first time in weeks, I fell asleep with a sense of hope for the future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but I was ready to face them head-on, knowing I wasn't alone anymore. The community college campus buzzed with activity as I made my way to my first class. At 5 months pregnant, my baby bump was now visible, drawing curious glances from other students. I clutched my textbooks tighter, feeling a mix of determination and anxiety. "You've got this, Clara," I whispered to myself, echoing Aunt Mabel's encouraging words from this morning. As I settled into a seat in the back of the classroom, a friendly voice caught my attention. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up to see a young woman with a warm smile. "No, go ahead," I replied, gesturing to the empty chair. "I'm Zoe," she said, sitting down. "First day jitters?" I nodded, feeling a wave of relief at her easy manner. "That obvious, huh?"
Zoe laughed.
"We're all in the same boat." "Well, maybe not exactly the same," she added, glancing at my bump. For a moment, I tensed, waiting for judgment. Instead, Zoe's smile widened. "My sister just had a baby. They're a handful, but so worth it. You're pretty brave, doing this while pregnant." Her words warmed me, and for the first time in months, I felt like I might actually belong somewhere. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Mornings were spent in classes, afternoons at the Sweet Bean Cafe, where I'd landed a part-time job, and evenings studying with Aunt Mabel's encouragement. Uncle Roy had even set up a small nursery in their spare room, his quiet support speaking volumes. One evening, as I wiped down tables at the cafe, my phone buzzed. A text from Vera. "Mom's been asking about you. Says she wants to talk." I froze, a familiar knot forming in my stomach. Before I could respond, another message came through. "I told her to give you space. Hope that's okay." Relief washed over me. "Thanks, V. I appreciate it," I typed back. As I finished my shift, my manager, Sarah, approached. "Clara, how would you feel about taking on some extra hours? We could use the help, and I know you're saving up for the baby." I hesitated, thinking of my growing workload at school. "I'm not sure I can manage more right now." Sarah nodded understandingly. "No pressure. But if you change your mind, the offer's open. You're doing great work here." Her words stayed with me as I drove home, a sense of pride blooming in my chest. For the first time in my life, I was standing on my own 2 feet, making my own choices. At home, I found Aunt Mabel poring over a pile of baby catalogs. "Oh, Clara, come look at these adorable onesies I found." I couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. "Aunt Mabel, you don't have to do all this." She waved off my protest. "Nonsense. This little one is family, and family takes care of each other." As we flipped through the catalogs, discussing cribs and strollers, I felt a sudden, strong kick from my baby. I gasped, placing a hand on my swollen belly. "Everything okay?" Aunt Mabel asked, concern etching her features. "Yes," I breathed, tears pricking my eyes. "He's kicking. Do you want to feel?" Aunt Mabel's eyes lit up as she placed her hand next to mine, waiting. When the baby kicked again, she let out a delighted laugh. "Oh my, that's quite a strong little one you've got there." In that moment, the reality of my situation hit me full force. In just a few months, I would be responsible for a tiny human life. The thought was terrifying but also exhilarating. "I think I'm going to name him Mason," I said softly, the name feeling right as soon as I spoke it. Aunt Mabel squeezed my hand. "That's a beautiful name, Clara." As we sat there, connected by the movement of new life, I felt a surge of determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on. For Mason, for myself, and for the family we were building. Not bound by blood, but by love and acceptance. Little did I know that the biggest challenge was yet to come, lurking just around the corner, ready to test everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and forgiveness. The soft glow of my phone screen illuminated the darkened nursery as I scrolled through social media, Mason sleeping peacefully in his crib beside me. It had been 6 months since his birth, and life had settled into a new normal of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and stolen moments of study between feedings. As I mindlessly swiped through updates from old classmates, a familiar face stopped me cold. Grant's smiling visage stared back at me, his arm wrapped around Vera's waist. The caption beneath the photo made my blood run cold. She said yes. #engaged, #future Mrs. Parker. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering to the floor. The noise startled Mason, and his cries filled the room. I picked him up mechanically, my mind reeling from what I'd just seen. Vera and Grant. Engaged. The betrayal cut deep, reopening wounds I thought had long since healed. Clara? Is everything okay? Aunt Mabel's concerned voice came from the doorway. I turned to her, tears streaming down my face. They're engaged. Vera and Grant. Understanding dawned in her eyes. She crossed the room, enveloping both Mason and me in a warm embrace.
Oh, sweetheart.
I'm so sorry. As the initial shock wore off, anger began to simmer beneath the surface. How could Vera do this? How long had this been going on? The questions swirled in my mind, demanding answers. The next morning, I called in sick to work and asked Aunt Mabel to watch Mason. I needed answers, and I knew just where to start. The drive to my childhood home felt surreal. As I pulled into the driveway, memories of the night I'd been thrown out flooded back. Taking a deep breath, I marched up to the front door and rang the bell. My mother answered, her eyes widening in surprise. Clara, what are you doing here? We need to talk, I said, pushing past her into the house. My father appeared in the hallway, his face hardening at the sight of me. You're not welcome here. I don't care, I spat. How long have Vera and Grant been together? Did you know about this? My mother's face paled. Clara, it's not what you think, dash. Not what I think. I laughed bitterly. My sister is engaged to the man who abandoned me and his child. What exactly am I supposed to think? My father stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. You will not speak to your mother that way. You made your choice, Clara. You have no right to judge Vera for hers. My choice. I felt my control slipping. You mean my choice to keep my baby? To not bow to your precious reputation. Enough. My father roared. Get out of this house. You are no longer a part of this family. As I turned to leave, a flash of movement caught my eye. A framed photo on the mantel, one I'd never noticed before. It showed a young boy with a familiar smile, my smile. Who is that? I demanded, pointing at the photo. My parents exchanged a panicked look. It's no one, my mother said quickly. An old family friend. But I knew she was lying. The resemblance was unmistakable. I have a brother, don't I? What happened to him? Where is he now? The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face had turned ashen, while my mother looked close to tears. His name is Eli, a voice said from behind me. I turned to see Vera standing in the doorway, her expression a mix of guilt and resolve. He's our older brother. They sent him away when he was diagnosed with autism. They didn't want a defective child ruining their perfect image. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Another child, cast aside for the sake of appearances. Just like me. Just like Mason. In that moment, something inside me hardened. I would find Eli. I would uncover every dirty secret this family had buried. And I would make sure the truth came to light, no matter the cost. As I stormed out of the house, I could hear my parents arguing with Vera. But I didn't care. I had a new mission now, a purpose that burned brighter than my anger or hurt. I would find my brother, and together, we would tear down the lies that had shaped our lives for far too long. The address Vera had given me led to a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of town. My heart raced as I approached the door marked 3B. This was it. After weeks of searching, I was finally going to meet Eli, the brother I never knew I had. I knocked, my hand trembling slightly. The door opened, revealing a man in his early 30s with familiar eyes, my eyes. Eli? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, a mix of curiosity and apprehension on his face. You must be Clara. As I stepped inside, I was struck by the orderliness of his apartment. Everything had its place, a stark contrast to the chaos of my life with Mason. I don't know where to begin, I admitted, sinking onto his couch. Eli sat across from me, his movements deliberate and precise. The beginning is usually a good place, he said, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. And so I told him everything. The pregnancy, Grant's abandonment, our parents' ultimatum, and my decision to keep Mason. As I spoke, Eli listened intently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, "They haven't changed, have they?" I shook my head. "No, they haven't." "Eli, what happened? Why did they send you away?" His eyes clouded with old pain. "I was diagnosed with autism when I was 5. Our parents, they couldn't handle it. They said I needed special care, but really, they just wanted me out of sight. I can't have an imperfect child ruining their image, after all." Anger flared in my chest. "That's horrible."
I'm so sorry, Eli.
He shrugged, but I could see the hurt beneath his calm exterior. "I've made peace with it. But hearing your story, it's like history repeating itself." We talked for hours, filling in the gaps of our shared history. As the sun began to set, Eli turned to me with a determined look. "Clara, I think it's time we confronted them. All of us, you, me, and Vera. They can't keep hiding behind their lies and pretenses." I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. The annual Monroe family reunion is next week. Everyone will be there, extended family, friends, business associates. It's the perfect opportunity to expose the truth. Eli hesitated. "Are you sure? This could change everything." "Everything's already changed," I said firmly. "It's time they face the consequences of their actions." The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Vera, racked with guilt over her engagement to Grant, agreed to help us. We gathered evidence, medical records, old photographs, legal documents, anything that would prove our parents' deception. As we pulled up to the lavish country club where the reunion was being held, I felt a mix of dread and determination. Eli squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Whatever happens in there," he said, "we're in this together." We walked into the ballroom, heads turning as people recognized us. Our parents stood near the center of the room, their faces paling as they saw Eli. "What is the meaning of this?" Our father hissed, approaching us. "Eli, you're not supposed to be here. And Clara, I thought I made it clear you're no longer welcome." I stood my ground, meeting his gaze. "We're here to tell the truth, Dad. All of it." "You wouldn't dare," our mother whispered, panic in her eyes. But I was done being silenced. In a loud, clear voice, I addressed the room. "Everyone, I have an announcement to make. My name is Clara Monroe, and this is my brother, Eli. Our parents have been lying to you, to all of us, for years." The room fell silent as I laid out our story: Eli's abandonment, my pregnancy and expulsion from the family, the years of deception and emotional manipulation. As I spoke, I could see the shock and disgust on the faces of our relatives and family friends. Our parents tried to interject, to spin the story, but their protests fell on deaf ears. When I finished, Eli stepped forward. "We're not here for revenge," he said calmly. "We're here for the truth, and for the family we should have been all along." In that moment, standing with Eli and Vera, I felt a sense of completion I'd never known before. Whatever came next, we would face it together, as a real family, bound by love and truth rather than lies and appearances. The facade had finally crumbled, and in its ruins, a new foundation was being built. The aftermath of our revelation at the family reunion was nothing short of seismic. Our parents' carefully constructed facade crumbled before our eyes, leaving them exposed and vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. In the weeks that followed, the repercussions rippled through every aspect of their lives. Dad's law firm partners called for his resignation, unwilling to be associated with someone who'd abandoned his own child. Mom's social circle, once her pride and joy, shrank as former friends distanced themselves from the scandal. Vera, caught in the middle of it all, finally found her voice. She broke off her engagement to Grant, realizing that she'd been seeking our parents' approval at the cost of her own happiness and morals. "I'm so sorry, Clara," she said one afternoon as we sat in Aunt Mabel's garden, watching Mason toddle around. "I should have stood up for you from the beginning." I squeezed her hand. We were all trapped in their web of lies. What matters is that we're free now. Eli, too, was finding his place in our newly reformed family. He and Mason formed an instant bond, their shared curiosity about the world creating a beautiful connection. As for our parents, They made a few attempts at reconciliation, but their words rang hollow. They spoke of forgiveness and moving forward, but I could see in their eyes that they still didn't understand the depth of their betrayal. "I don't hate you," I told them during our final meeting, "but I can't have you in my life, or Mason's life, until you truly understand and change." It was a difficult decision, but one I knew was necessary for my own healing and for Mason's future. Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. I graduated from community college with honors, Eli started a support group for adults with autism, and Vera found her passion working for a nonprofit that helped single mothers. It was at one of Vera's fundraising events that I met Henry. He was a widower with a young daughter named Lila, and from the moment we started talking, I felt a connection I'd never experienced before. Our relationship grew slowly, built on mutual respect and understanding. Henry never tried to replace Grant in Mason's life, but he became a steady, loving presence for both of us. On a warm summer evening, 2 years after that fateful family reunion, Henry proposed. As I looked at the simple, elegant ring on my finger, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. That night, as I tucked Mason into bed, he asked, "Mommy, are we going to be a real family now?" I smiled, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "We've always been a real family, sweetheart. Henry and Lila are just making our family a little bigger." As I closed his bedroom door, I caught sight of the family photo on the wall. Mason, Eli, Vera, Aunt Mabel, Uncle Roy, Henry, and Lila. This was my family now, bound not by blood or obligation, but by love, acceptance, and shared experiences. I thought back to that scared, pregnant girl I'd been, feeling alone and rejected by those who should have loved me most. If I could go back, I'd tell her that the road ahead would be hard, but that it would lead to a life fuller and more beautiful than she could have imagined. The next morning, as I sipped coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of pink and gold, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey had been difficult, filled with pain and betrayal, but it had led me here, to a life built on truth, surrounded by people who loved me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. I placed a hand on my stomach, smiling at the secret I'd yet to share with anyone. Another life was growing inside me, a symbol of the love and trust Henry and I had built together. As I looked out at the new day dawning, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them. I had found my strength, my voice, and my true family. The facade had fallen, and in its place stood something real, something lasting. This was my new beginning, my chance to break the cycle and create a legacy of love and acceptance for my children. And I was ready to embrace every moment of it.